This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, so welcome everyone to our 5th Empower Hour with Mukunda Studio. My name is Mukunda Mark Morozumi, and I am excited that we are continuing these community discussions, which I've given the name Empower Hour, because I truly want these to be something that activates us, stimulates thought, but also stimulates some kind of action that we can think about taking, whether it's in our personal life or in our communities and beyond. What I'd like to do is to basically go through some slides to be able to start us off to kind of sort of create the community space that I'd like to invoke here. So I'll go ahead and switch to the share screen. So let me know if you all can see this. And for Instagram Live, I'll be reading everything off of the slides. And the first slide says Empower Hour. The topic of our 5th community discussion is what's your slant? And this is recognizing AAPI Heritage Month. I'll talk a little bit more about that title as I start our opening. And we wish to invoke a space that is AAPI abundant, yay! That is courageous and kind. A space that is filled with the power of diversity. It's welcoming to everyone here and beyond. I always want us to remember that there are always ways that we can think about those that aren't in the rooms, that we can help empower and educate. Want to invoke a space that is supportive to all of our feelings and emotions. A space that's inspiring for us to take action and to help inspire good efforts. And certainly I'd like to also make sure that this is a space that is joyful and intentional. And if you haven't muted yourself, just make sure you're keeping check on that, everyone. Thank you so much. Welcome everyone who's entering. We're going through a few slides here that is also just helping to set the tone. May we all enter this space with open eyes, open hearts, and open minds. May this gathering provide inspiration, healing, creativity, or even just a good hour of our time together. If you need to leave early, it's the divine will, and we're happy you could be here for any time you have given. Let's take a moment to look around at your fellow participants and feel the miracle of being gathered in this virtual space together. And then I'd like to go ahead and welcome the guests that are here with us today. We have, and I'll do that again once we see all everyone's faces, but we have Eliza Chu, who has been a longtime friend, and we first were co-employees together at this business called Fan Asylum, which is currently where Mukunda Studio is. And we've kept in touch all through the years, from me teaching at one of her offices, to marrying her and her husband, to enjoying the journey of being a Bay Area resident. Kenjo Shaw, I'm grateful that you are here. Kenjo, I met through my days with the Yoga Loft at MX3 Fitness. She's a yoga teacher here in the Bay Area. She's also beginning to come on board at Mukunda Studio to help support the studio. And she'll start us off with some offerings about AAPI month. I see Katrina Natori. I'm glad you made it. Yay, Katrina's here. And she's actually connected with Tim McQuaid, who's the owner of Fan Asylum. Are you, I forget, niece? Is the connection through?
Yeah, niece through marriage.
Okay, yeah. So, and Katrina has become a student, and that's how I got to know her. Is Tim was like, come take classes with Mark. And so she started coming, and she's become a regular student. Alina O'Donnell, long time friend, probably the oldest friend here that we met when we were kids in Cincinnati, Ohio, attended the Creative Performing Arts School together. And she was just out here recently in San Francisco. And then I just saw her a week ago in Cincinnati. So good to see you, Alina. Jesse is also a friend who I've mostly just been seeing in Pete's lately, on and off through the years, but we knew each other back from our dancing careers. And he is a dancer and the director of Steamroller. And I'm just really grateful that I thought to ask you when we were chatting the other day, and you're like, yeah, you were hoping this would be in person, but here we are. And each of you that are here, I'm really glad that we're creating another talk where this can be a discussion. And that's always what I hope for, is that we all add in what we can. And so that's it. Yes, my little fun graphic. Empower Hour. Dun, 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 dun. All right. Well, thank you all so much. What I'd like to do is to introduce now formally all of you that are here, and then I'll give a brief intro, and then just kind of start with some topics to talk about. So I think what I'll do is I'll go in the same order that I just did on the list, and then also give a chance for the few of you that are here also as our distinguished guests. So Eliza, would you like to say hello and just offer any connection?
Hi, everyone. So, you know, my name is Eliza, known Mark for quite a bit, as you mentioned. So I'm born and raised in San Francisco. And my parents actually, they immigrated from Hong Kong at a really young age, like 19, 18, was when they came to San Francisco. So my dad doesn't speak English at all. So for a long time, Chinese was my first language, and I didn't speak English until I went to school, which was in second grade, actually. We had a Chinese teacher in my kindergartner in my first grade. And so I actually didn't really speak much English until I was in second grade. But I actually kind of appreciate being able to speak Chinese at home. It makes me feel more connected to my Chinese side. And growing up in San Francisco, you know, there's a big Chinese community. And so I made a lot of friends, very similar background, where they're either born here but speak Chinese, or they came here at a young age from Hong Kong or something, and we all spoke Chinese together. And so even though I was born and raised there, I feel really connected to my Hong Kong, to my Chinese side. But sometimes you feel like, you know, you could speak both languages fluently, but you're not good at either. Like your grammar's not good. And so I feel like I could kind of get it, like I could kind of like fake it, but I don't feel like I really belong in either oftentimes. But you know, I don't think I'm the only one. I'm sure like a lot of people have their own identity crisis, be it gender or race or, you know, culture. But that's just like something I've noticed. But I have noticed when I was looking through like my background that I am very fortunate to be raised in San Francisco, because even if there was judgment, I don't really feel it, at least. You know, I think we are respectful in that area. And so I feel really grateful about that. And given the opportunity to learn both the Chinese culture and the American culture and integrate it to a way that works for both me and my family. I'm actually now, though, with a partner who is not Asian or Chinese. And so I have noticed that I do sometimes feel a little disconnected from my Chinese side because of that. I do see my parents once a week, as you know, as I try, and I could tell my Chinese has slowly deteriorated over time, being with my partner for 7 years. And that, I thought that was kind of interesting too. I think a part of me is kind of like, oh, I want to grab onto it, but how, you know? So that was something I've noticed. So that's a little bit background.
Thank you, Eliza. And let's have Kenjo, if you'd like to give a little intro.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Kenjo, and thanks, Mark, first of all, starting this Empower Hour series, and especially bringing us all together to talk about AAPI Heritage. I actually moved to the United States about 15 or so years ago, and my family is in India. And I have to say that California is definitely special and unique, at least for me, because having no family here, no friends here, a lot of people have welcomed me into their lives, whether it was at school or work, or just meeting people through community and volunteering. And it's been all kinds of people. And that is one of the things I also, to Mark's point, highlight that surely there is still a lot of work to be done, but also recognizing these positive sides and the people that do reach out and appreciate the diversity in culture. So I'm extremely grateful for that. And interestingly, it wasn't until maybe about 10 years ago that I started being curious and digging more into my roots in yoga, Ayurveda, and meditation. And I'm just glad now to be sharing that with everyone that I come across, in a way, just to like, if somebody asks me, I'm more than happy to share information, but also I feel that being, I can't find the right word right now, but trying to shine yoga, not just as a formal workout, but a way of lifestyle, and helping people see the different aspects of yoga. And that brings me a lot of joy when people are, I see the delight in their eyes and they're more curious and they want to learn more. And I'm so glad that I met Mark through my love for yoga, and looking forward to continuing that journey. One thing that I want to share that Eliza shared, I also have a partner who's not Indian or a person of color. And sometimes I do feel disconnected, also having lived so many years. But this year, I decided I'm gonna do all the Indian things and ask that my partner share with me. And so far it's been a success, and that's my goal. And thanks for having me here.
Thank you, Kenjo. That's great. Katrina, did you want to say hello and just share for a moment?
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now. Yeah, hi, I'm Katrina. I was actually born and raised in Arizona, where I'm actually visiting right now. I'm visiting family. So I'm half Japanese and half Chinese American. So growing up in Arizona, it's I wasn't really surrounded by a lot of Asians, and I feel like I kind of lost a lot of. I didn't feel like I really belonged anywhere. So I moved out to San Francisco when I was like in my late 20s, and I love it. I love the diversity, and I feel like I'm kind of starting to rediscover a little bit more of my cultural identity, and it's a really nice feeling to kind of feel like you belong. Yeah, so I'm just I'm glad to be here and to hear everyone's experiences as well, and yeah, I look forward to the rest of the talk.
Thank you, Katrina. I'm glad that you made it even in your travels. All right, and Alina, would you like to go ahead and say hello to everyone?
Sure. Well, first, Mark, thank you for even, for one, sponsoring these Empower Hours, two, for inviting me and really celebrating Asian American Pacific Islander Month. And I was thinking about, like, so how do you do an introduction for something like this? And obviously, for everyone here, I am mixed race, Hawaiian, and we'll at some point talk a little bit more about my story and my journey. I'm adopted out of Honolulu, so I was born in Honolulu and brought to Cincinnati. So that's the Cincinnati connection with Mark. And, I've always known that I was Hawaiian, and, a couple of years ago, got my ancestry, and I knew I had some Asian, so I knew I had Chinese, but I didn't know I actually had some Japanese and others. So here you are, you're seeing someone who's in their 50s who's newly discovering some aspects of her cultural heritage. The other piece is, even though I've always known I was Hawaiian, I was brought up to know my other culture. So, African American, and having the strong ties and connections there, and really instilled in me about understanding our cultural heritages. Um, and I say that plural, because so often, um, if you're born here, many times we are just of mixed race. So here, is you, my perspective will be of someone who is mixed race, having been more immersed in one, um, culture, and really learning from afar. I will say my other culture, which is actually my dominant blood, which I knew that before having an ancestry. But anyway, all of that to say is being able to celebrate AAPI month. It has been a wonderful. Last week, was able to do a hula performance at our Asian food fest. So stepping and walking into this part of my culture is something I will say is a little bit newer. And I, we'll talk later, but sometimes I do feel like I'm masquerading, so I look this way, but I don't talk, with um, the colloquialisms of Hawaiian. So that's part of my journey, and we'll all get a chance to have some time today to talk about it. But thank you again, Mark, and for everyone else, I just can't wait to get to know you here.
Thank you, Alina. I'm so happy you can join in also from Cincinnati. Thanks to our Zoom powers. And Jesse, would you like to go ahead and chime in and say hello?
I would. So like Mark said, this was the result of running into each other at Pete's several times in the last month. And he just said, hey, I'm having this AAPI discussion. Sorry. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So, of course, I'm always interested in this discussion because it's part of my art making. It's been part of the composition of my dance company, which has at various times been entirely Asian American, and maybe with one token white person, and has always been super queer, which I love. And so Katrina, I think the first speaker, what we were talking about, sort of the disconnect of I was familiar with language and that sort of being a gatekeeping mechanism, that makes you less Asian. So, and Alina, when you're talking about imposter syndrome, I totally feel because my parents raised me to speak English, knowing that it's the fastest way to assimilation. And I'm kind of mad at them. Why didn't you teach me how to speak the language you speak at home? Which I kind of understand, just from familiarity, intonation, body language. And I actually understand a lot more than people give me credit for, because a lot of my dancers speak Tagalog, and they think they're throwing shade at everyone else. It's I know what you're saying, honey. Don't say that. That is just straight up rude. But I also think it's a fucking hilarious. So yeah, I get that. And I didn't start exploring my heritage until I moved to the Bay Area. I was born here, but I grew up in San Diego. When I moved up here, I was sort of exposed to sort of the diversity and richness of the culture up here, my queerness, my Asian American. I started dancing for an Asian American dance company, and so that was a real sort of wake up. Wow, this is what it's like to dance with people who are like you. That blew my mind because I work in a lot of primarily white spaces, and I'm quite often the only person of color there. which now I'm super aware of, and it's like, oh, this is just grosses me out so much because you see the privilege, and it's sort of like, wow, you don't get it, do you? So yeah, I could talk forever about like working in primarily white spaces and how like horrific it is, and like how it's a constant struggle to dismantle that. But we'll let someone else speak. So yeah, I'm glad to be here. Always glad to talk about this stuff.
Thank you, Jess. Well, I'm glad you also made it, given that you are at work, and I understand we'll keep an eye on the clock with you to make sure you have your time. And I just want to say hello to others that have joined in. Also, I'm really happy that we have folks that have tuned in. And I primarily want to say hello to Anjali, Rachel. She has been a part of the last 4 Empower Hours, and she's been a beautiful contributor to a lot of those talks. And it's been really fun building that experience with you. And I'm happy you're joining today as a guest. I also see Mia. Yay, Mia's in the house. And Mia and I have known each other for a couple of years now through Integral Yoga as well, which is how I know Anjali, through Integral Yoga. And we've co-led a couple of yoga teacher trainings together, including a recent BIPOC yoga teacher training, which she's part of the leading team this year. So welcome. I see Ankita was here. I don't see your video on, but I know that you were here. And Maria, I know you're a friend of Kenjo's. So yay, glad you joined in. And my brother, the Steve Bros, I see he's trying to join in as well. So there he is with the Golden Gate Bridge in the background. Very nice. So for all of us at any point, this is definitely discussion style. So feel free to chime in and share. I will do my best to help moderate at times and to steer some of the conversation, but I'm very happy for all of us if we start to think of topics that seem to get richer. I'll start us out with just a bit of a brief intro also from myself, and to give a little bit of context for where I'd like our talk to sort of get into today. Many of you know me, and as we just talked about, I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, along with my brother, where we grew up in a city where there really wasn't a lot of diversity in terms of anything outside of being white or black. And I often felt like I was either one of those races, depending on what friends I hung out with. I rarely could I recognize that I had my own racial identity, and being part Japanese. So we have a Japanese father, and our mother is Jewish and Georgian and English. And so we actually had a talk about being mixed race. So that probably is what I more identify with and feel a connection with. Asian identity became much more illuminated when I joined a company called In Mixed Company. And it's while I was in Cincinnati, an Asian American dance company came to perform, and they did a piece that was about Chinese immigrant workers at a factory in Boston. It was a historical piece. And so what they would do, they would travel, and they would have their company would be the Chinese immigrants of the piece. And then typically wherever they travel, the other people would be the white workers. So because of my background, I got to be with the company as one of the Chinese workers in that piece. And I got to know a number of the company members, including a woman named Maura Nguyen Donahue. And then she invited me to work with her in her company she was forming called In Mixed Company. And it was all of us that were mixed Japanese, Asian. She was Vietnamese, Irish. There was Chinese. So we had a lot of different races. And that's where I felt like, oh, wow. Kind of like Jesse was saying, I felt like, oh, I feel my people. And it was through dance, through that medium. And that was a beautiful experience to build that brotherly, sisterly connection. But I also saw where there's a lot of the imbalance in the world. When I started to become more conscious of presenting myself and being able to feel confidently that I was Asian American. Moving out to San Francisco, I would say, has been also a gift. where I feel like, when I look around, there's a lot more people that look like me. What I do miss is that there's not a lot of other diversity in terms of what I was used to in Cincinnati. It was much more 50-50 black and white. So it's just an interesting thing to notice where, there's probably always some kind of either external or internal imbalance that will be presented to us as we journey through this life. And so much of it, I think, is about finding a way to create that connection to our own center, whatever that is, whether we identify with it culturally, through our gender, through race, through the human experience. And I think that tends to be a place to get to. Sometimes it's helpful to find your community that strengthens you and then expand that experience. That's been how I've seen it. Expand it to see that we all are working to find a way to unify rather than to segregate and compartmentalize. Much of what we see in our culture and a lot of the AAPI, there's a lot of beautiful cultural components that can be brought forward and can be part of what we see being shared with other cultures, like yoga, for example, or the martial arts, or some of the art that's been of Asian influence. And so it's always interesting to see how things weave into cultures and then what happens when it gets woven in, the beautiful things and the not so beautiful things. I was talking with Ankita earlier about the corporate conversation. And then I saw this article where there's a predominance of Asian Americans in many of the corporate settings, in particular within the technology field. But what we don't see is a lot of people who are able to advance into the C-suite, into the CEO level, and take on higher management positions. It tends to be that there's a bar that's been held. So there's a high population of Asian Americans in that field, but not who are advancing and have positions. Those tend to be reserved for a lot of white men. But because there started to be this shift to technology companies opening up in other countries, America is now saying, oh, well, we'll let some Asian Americans take some higher roles. Don't go away, come back. So it's just an interesting thing. Is it good? Is that bad? It's like, well, it's an interesting thing. So I'd love to have any input if anybody's experiences about that. We're going to go from the personal to the, to the more cultural, business, universal, whatever topics. So on that note, I'd like to start off with some questions and to stir up some other thought. And essentially, we've heard a little bit about each from the panel about, your journey of coming to, I guess, coming out as AAPI, as it may be for some of us. What I'd like to hear, because of the topic and the title, What's Your Slant? I chose that as, again, there's a little bit of humor to it, but it's also a little bit of pain, potentially for some of us who have been made fun of for our eyes being a little different. And that certainly was my case. But I almost want to take that back and let's empower ourselves with something that maybe once could have been used to hurt us and say, that doesn't hurt me. And so what it does ask is, what is our take on this? What is our take on this experience? That's what I mean by what is your slant? What is your angle? So if anybody wanted to speak about that, what does that word slant conjure up to you? And what is your take on being AAPI in the US or in the world? So anybody can, I'll go back to the full screen here. And if anybody, I see Jesse raising his hand, go for it.
Yeah, I totally, when I saw that use of the term slant, I'm like, beautiful. Because it does have, it has so many connotations. It has some very derogatory ones, which I've heard many times. As a kid growing up, primarily in white spaces, oh, you have slanty eyes. Well, yeah, I do. But I also like that, slant is also about sort of the positioning of your body. It's an angle. So it also sort of dovetails into my queerness. I'm like, yeah, I'm not straight. I'm actually this way. So I love that. And I love that, like sort of reclaiming it and like really repositioning it in many different sort of contexts. It's like everything is all tied together. Like my queerness is like intersects with my AAPI, which I was actually looking at it. There's a new, like a sort of like a larger designation. It's, what is it? AAPI NH. So it's like, again, the alphabet soup becomes larger as we try and encompass like a larger, like to embrace more sort of identities. So it's like, oh man, like I just, like I just sort of got used to AAPI, and then there's the whole BIPOC designation. I was like, well, where does AAPI fall into that? And I thought it was interesting you were bringing up sort of Asians in terms of like our like existence in corporate structures. I think it's very fascinating. Like when you're talking about, oh, they'll let us in to a certain level, but that's sort of where we stop. Like you're not sort of allowed into the upper echelons of power, and that whatever speaks to white supremacy. But it also like it's a discussion I've had with other artists about like sort of this stereotype of the model minority. Like are Asians model like are we model, like we model good behavior or passive behavior? So is that why we don't progress that far? Is because we're not super aggressive? Like, and I just like I remember a conversation I had with a boyfriend. I was having trouble with one of my exes, like, oh well, that's like your gift is like, oh you're so calm, like fuck you, like why would you even put that on me? Like you're assuming a lot just based on the way I look. They're like, oh, I'm not a fucking Buddhist, was raised Catholic. So yeah, there's a lot of that too. It's like, but I mean, it does sort of come up, like I see it sort of in my, like as I move through like my professional career, as I'm an arts administrator now, like I get access to things because whatever, I work well with people. Like I'm the model minority, but I also am really outspoken, and like I will throw shade. I don't care who says, I don't care who's there. Like I'll talk behind your back, but more likely I will say it to your face. So there's that breaking the stereotype. Like I can be both at the same time. Like I am that complicated. But yeah, like I definitely see it like in the dance community. Like wow, there are a lot more Asian dancers moving into who are like highlighted or selected. It's like, and God damn it, they're stealing my dancers. I am actually a fucking Asian American dance company, but all these white companies are stealing my people. I'm like, really? You want to dance for those? You want to dance for the white people? Fuck you. I get it, but I mean, Jesus Christ, I just so much tangled up in it. And I see it's like, oh wow, you just stole that Asian dancer from me. I've had it happen many times. I'm like, because whatever, like you were saying, Mark, like we're only allowed so much access to money, access to opportunity. And it's like, is it because I'm not speaking up? I'm not sort of raising a bigger ruckus? But then culturally, that's kind of not what I do. Like, I'm sorry, my parents raised me to be like very proper and, like polite. But that's also not part of my upbringing in San Francisco. I was also raised to be super rude, like hella queer. I'm like, yeah. So it's a lot of things come into conflict there. So it's an interesting question, Mark, and thank you for bringing all of that up.
Thank you. And thank you for all of your passion and all of your spice. I love it. Anyone else? I see Kenjo with her hand raised, and then Mia.
Okay. Oh, there we go. So I learned something new today. I figured when you put what's your slant in the subject line, I was like, I'm sure it has something to do with being Asian in America, but I didn't know. So thank you for sharing that, because I learned something new. But before looking at least what the connection was with Asians in America and it being a derogatory term, the first thing that came to mind, anybody who's lived in San Francisco might be familiar that there's a restaurant called the Slant. It's reopening again. But anyway, that just came to mind. And I think it has Asian fusion food. So that was my thing. But I am glad that AAPI is an overarching umbrella for all Asians. When I moved to the United States and I would say I'm Asian, people would be like, no, you're not Asian. And I'm like, I don't understand. India is a country in Asia. So I am confused. And I'm like, I don't understand. So we have South Asians, we have Asians from the Far East, and Asians who would be maybe Chinese, Vietnamese. I don't know what all countries are included, but I'm like, I don't care. I know I'm Asian. And actually that brings me to when I was looking up how did AAPI come about. There were two students at UC Berkeley, Emma G, a Chinese woman, and Yuji Ichioka, a Japanese man. And they saw that there were Black groups, there were Indian groups, there were segregated groups of minorities. And they wanted to bring all Asian, Pacific Islanders, Hawaiians, everyone who had some sort of Asian heritage together. And they kind of started, that is actually the first time the term Asian American was used to kind of refer to all Asians in America. And I think it was Bush Sr. Well, the whole thing started with a senator in Hawaii who advocated to celebrate and honor Asian heritage by a week in May. And May, because May 7th, 1843 was also the time the first Japanese people immigrated to the United States. And I don't know the details around that, but that's why it's the month of May. And ultimately Bush Sr. in 1992 made it the entire month to celebrate Asian American Pacific Islander heritage. And it's been great to learn about how beautiful and diverse all the different smaller communities and countries and cultures are. So for me, I also extended one step further to not just Asians, but I feel this is the opportunity for me to be a person of support for anyone who might be struggling to fit in or to not fit in, but belong in America. And so whether it's women or young immigrants, whoever it is, it doesn't have to be, but it's like, yes, I have been through some of those things and I can relate. And I'm extremely fortunate that I've met some nice people and I feel like I want to be there. I used to be embarrassed of how I spoke English and I was made fun of. And now I go back to when I was first there and I actually encourage people to speak the way they speak because that's their culture. And if Americans, don't necessarily pronounce things correctly and we are okay with it, so should we be okay with people not speaking English correctly because of no fault of theirs. But overall, it's great for people to come together, no matter what kind of Asian you are, but to support each other and other members of the community. Thanks.
Thank you, Kenjo. I loved getting some background and hearing about that. Thanks for including that. Yeah, glad you're with us today. And Mia, I saw that you had your hand up, and then we'll probably switch to another topic if we feel that's what we're ready for. Okay, go for it, Mia.
Thanks, Kenjo, for bringing that up, actually, about belonging and things like that. I'm a little bit nervous because what I'd like to bring up is a little bit spicy, and Mark knows that I like to just get in there clumsy and everything, so bear with me. When we think about the exclusion of our particular group, Asian American, this type of American, I think we're all suffering from white supremacy. And we're talking about, oh, we want to push up the ceiling, we want to elevate, blah, 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 blah. But why don't we bring up the floor underneath us higher? And I'm speaking about like what comes to mind in particularly is like, is that 2020 when the Black Lives Matter movement exploded, and all of a sudden we realized like, oh, damn, this is what's happening. It's been happening, but now we're, you know, we were kind of sheltered in place so we couldn't like distract ourselves. And that, you know, felt good. Like we're finally reconciling these really deep old wounds that this country's been founded on. And like later on, like as with all things, it sort of died down. Not that to say that it didn't happen anymore, but the interest sort of died down. And then another resurgent of like, you know, like Asian hate came up, and it's like, oh no, we are also being hated on and blah, 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 blah. And so to me, it felt like it was that movement, Black Lives, and it's not just Black Lives, not just African descendants, also the indigenous people. Like we owe a great debt to the backs of indigenous and African descendants, right? And we haven't rectified that. So I feel like our exclusion and our feeling of isolation and discrimination comes from white supremacy. And so I think like if we lift the floor up, the ones that's been like crushed, that is currently crushed, then maybe like we're being treated the way they've been treated. And if we bring them up, all our problems here as Asian Americans would sort of dissolve in a way because we're lifting the ground up. And so that's my preface, right? Within the Asian community is harshly racist, harshly racist. Last year or a year ago, there's a really like prestigious high school here, like all, you know, it's like high level high school, and it's predominantly white and Asian actually. And then so I think the school district was discussing about like bringing some of the families in, you know, the larger, like the more Black communities. I forgot the neighborhood. What's the neighborhood called? Anyway, on the edges, to bring them there, you know, because we want some equity, they want diversity in the school. And the majority of the resistance were Asians. Like, we don't want our kids to be with these Black kids. You're gonna lower down the grades. You're gonna blah, 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 blah. It was such like you are also part of, like, you're also being treated that way. And I feel like when you are been oppressed for so long, when you've been a colonized people, you tend to take on the colonizers or the oppressors' views because you're like, I want to be like them. So I just wanted to put that out there and maybe talk about like the racism within Asian communities. I mean, I can, you know, like as I'm an immigrant, I was born in the Philippines, came here, and my views about Black or African, I like, you know, they, and it's in media, like they scare you. And it was through growing up with this community. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not going to believe what my parents and my elders have been telling me. These are cool people, like they're my people, you know? But then the further away I come away from that, like the more apparent that it's still there. It's like as old as this country. So I wanted to kind of switch that up, if that's okay, Mukunda, about, let's talk about the hate that we hold against our darker skinned brothers. Since like there's a major colorism also within Asian communities. Like I go to the Philippines, I want to go get some sun. They're like, why would you want to do that? Your skin is so fair. You know, like I think that's like a big like underlying current that keeps us separated and oppressed, because we're always like, oh, let me push up, let me be like the white people, instead of let's bring up our brothers and sisters up so that we can all come to this together. So I don't know if that there's a question in there, but that's kind of where I wanted to get this like slant
Yes.
for this discussion.
Yes. Thank you, Mia.
Now.
No, I'm so happy. I'm glad. I knew I could rely on you to give us some extra oomph, but it makes me want to like add an extra hour onto our time together. It's interesting because I see some hands here, but I also just want to say it often is the case when I've when we dive into these particular discussions on each topic, there's some common denominators that come up, which is really what I want to highlight, which ends up really, it comes back to ourselves. Essentially, we have got to look at our own behaviors because we have been agreeing to the ones that have been given to us from oftentimes from our own family, from our own, parents, etc. So it's sort of like, what can we do to break that cycle? Because it really is a impervious and many times repetitive and gets us stuck in our sort of habitual zones. But there's got to be a way for us to shift that, because even in our own culture, even in our own home, even in our own block, I mean, this is big in the gay community too, which if Jesse gets it and I can chat about that together some, like even within the gay community, the amount of hate. And you're like, oh my gosh, you guys, look at what's happened to us. Why are we going to do the same, same thing? So much healing. But I think it happens through some of this kind of conversation and seeing the commonality and calming our nervous systems to realize, oh yeah, where's the similarity? Where's that common human connection of kindness? That's why I'm such a big advocate of empower the movers of human kindness as my tagline, because it just seems like that's where we need to just like simmer it down a little bit, or else we just start burning everything up. But we've got to have the fire. I think the fire is what burns the things we need to purify, but we don't want to kill, burn everything. I'm going to have Alina take over. And then I think I saw Eliza.
Yeah. So this is great. We have a great group here. So a couple of things, they really are resonating with me right now as someone who's mixed race, African American and Hawaiian. And going back to something that Jesse said, like, hey, why are my people going to other companies? And Mia, really what you're saying, hey, we have something within our own respective communities, sort of this hierarchy, our own divisiveness within our own smaller communities, right? And so here's what I want to say, especially for those of us who were born and raised in the States here. We are born and raised in a country that is dominated by, a dominant culture. So we are conditioned, we have privilege. So whether we consider that social economic privilege, but we speak the same language as the dominant culture. What we do is we go to our own, here's the lexicon of all of our communities, right? There's that intersection. All of us have some section of something else, right? And so why do other people go to other companies? Because they're dominant. We know these big names. They weren't big names, they came from our communities. So we're conditioned, no matter what schools or communities we live in, oh, that is what, this is what the upper echelons look like. So I have to go to that school. I have to dance for that company. There's something that Mark said to me years, like we must have been in our 20s, and I really, really wanted to dance for, the major company, in the United States for a ballet. And he said, he was so matter of fact, Alina, is you have talent. There are other companies. Have you thought about, and he literally said, oh, he gave me these other companies to think about. Have you thought about Bill T. Jones? Have you thought about, and I thought, no, it never occurred to me, because we were conditioned to think that a certain way of thinking, a certain way of living, going to certain schools, certain companies, certain communities, these were considered and are considered the best, right? Or whatever. So we're all conditioned by the same community, just So, and I'm really only speaking as a person that grew up. So I think that's one, is we can feel quote unquote slanted when our own folks are like, well, wait, how come you're not coming to my restaurant? How come you're not, coming, buying my products? And the fact of the matter is, there's something that we have to make an individual and a collective choice. Are we going to dismantle the current construct now and create a new construct where not only are we don't need to be invited to be involved, we need to be a part of the construction, right? So there's something, and I just really want to leave this with you. You probably already know this, but a friend of mine here, a new friend of mine here, she's just on fire. She's a transracial adoption, South Korean young woman. I mean, young, in her 20s, and just or maybe early 30s, but she's just dynamic. She introduced me to something called the Collective Care Pod. It's a national organization that was started by Sandra Kim, which is a South Korean American who has these mind-body connections, and especially after the summer of 2020, George Floyd, so many, not just African Americans, but so many people of color were just feeling beyond disconnected. And so the Collective Care Pod was a way for us to deal with trauma informed as it relates to us as BIPOC, and how we create these safety care plans for the specific triggers that we have that the dominant culture doesn't have. And so part of that is us being able to have spaces like this. Mark, again, thank you for having the Empower Hour. How do we reclaim something that was, frankly, taken away from us or put upon us, and then how do we turn that into power? So this is a resource for all of us, this Collective Care Pod. That, yes, Wild Seed Society, that's right, Kenjo, absolutely. And I think that these spaces that we have right now, these are not just great spaces for us to communicate to one another, and also for those who are joining us today, but also I think we can have some tactical pieces that we can walk away from of how we care for and support ourselves. So I see other hands that are up. So I wanted to share that with this intersection. We are a part of the dominant culture. We think a certain way, and then we have to code switch back to our respective or communities. So
Excellent. Thank you, Alina. Appreciate all that. And Eliza, I saw your hand.
I think we're almost running out of time, but I just want to make a couple of comments what Mia said, how we are the model minority, and in that sense, take on kind of that bias perspective among ourselves. And I think maybe that could be what they wanted, right? And part of the reason why some people don't see, or even Asian people don't see Indians as Asian, right? That's like a bias and a racist part of the perspective. And I think we really have to, like, I think Kenjo said, unlearn all that, right? Even like when I was visiting Hong Kong, I visit Hong Kong quite often, like my aunt in Hong Kong will look down on Chinese people from China. She just thinks they're like, we're all Chinese, but she thinks people from China are not as educated, or like, because, yeah, I'm not gonna go into it, but basically is that we, even among the Chinese, they look upon each other, and the Taiwanese people don't consider themselves as Chinese.
And
right?
Eliza, are you talking about mainland China?
Yes, exactly.
When you're saying, okay.
Yeah, sorry, mainland China, because for Hong Kong was a British colony for 100 years. I always forget they're China now too. But yeah, thank you for pointing that out. But yes, mainland people from the mainland, they would look down upon them, and I think we need to really unlearn that, and at the same time recognize that our way of thinking is what our society want us to feel as the the model minority, and we look down, even like my parents, their generation will look down on Black people. Like when I bought a house in Oakland, they're like, do you really want to buy a house in Oakland? Like, aren't you worried about like the Black people? I'm like, you know, the Black people in Oakland are nicer than the white people in San Francisco sometimes. Like, you know, that's why I told them, and they have nothing to say, but it's the truth. Like, they have, it's what they were, you know, when they came in the 80s, that's what they were taught. You know, they're taught, and that's what they brought upon us. And we just got to have to like tell people, when we hear something that's not right, like, oh, actually, no, Indians are also, you know, Asians, you know, you just could correct them, right? Or correct yourself when you're thinking it. And like, you know, respectfully tell you know, people who are older, like, no, that is not the right way of thinking. And I think that's how we empower each other, and start from us, because we do have a lot of the Asian upbringing of like, maybe that's why there's no people in the higher levels, because we were raised to be proper, not to be, you know, aggressive, you know, and maybe that's why we don't get what we want. And I think we need to kind of like teach people and encourage people, like, why not? You know, why not go for it? So I'm going to give, I think you have 3 minutes left. So Mark, I'll give it back to you.
Thank you. Actually, we extended this. It goes to 2:15 because of this feeling that happened in the other Empower Hours. Is we're like, oh, we need a little bit more time. So thankfully, we are gonna, we do have still a little bit more time together, but excellent points. I want to go ahead and see if there's anybody else from our guests that are joining, if there's anything anybody wanted to share. And then I'll, if so, let you guys talk. If not, I have definitely some more topics I'll start to throw out. So just sort of, you know, you can use the raise hand function if anybody wants there, and let that happen. And we can always come back to topics. We don't need to start fresh new topics, but I really think, honestly, it's a hot topic for me that is brought up here about almost like distilling it all the way down to the source of where do we see some of this behavior originate and get perpetuated. And it does tend to seem to be a common rippling effect that comes from some initial point, whether we think it's white supremacy, or I think it's goes even further back into the cellular makeup of what we are as an organism in this universe. What happens at a cellular level? What happens, as we've learned with viruses, this desire to take over, to colonize the host. It's like, on some level, I really have been meditating on this. Is this just our composition? But what I also know through the practice of yoga is that what makes us different from simple organisms and even the animal kingdom is that we have a capacity to discern. We have the capacity to be able to reflect on, is this helpful? Is this leading us in a place, is this leading us towards harmony? Or is this perpetuating a tearing apart of our actual race? And so it's so interesting that without studying this, without some kind of self-study, I think we will default to some of those behaviors of just reacting to what do we think is the best, because that's going to make me survive. If I can steer myself towards those that are the more popular, there's a mentality that that's going to create safety. So even amongst our own culture, it's that lighter skinned. And I'm like, where does that, I think it's beyond the white supremacy. I think there's even something even deeper. But so anyway, it's just interesting that there's all of that behavior that if we don't learn to make harmony within our own setting, you know, where are we going to ever imagine? And I want to meditate more on this idea from the floor up, from the ground up idea that Mia brought up, because there's a part of me, part of my business model is actually looking at the ones who have power and to transform, because if nothing happens on that level, that power is so strong, it keeps determining the fate of too many, no matter how much the collective screams. The Steve Bros, I see that you raised your hand, so I'm going to have you join in.
Yeah, so on the cellular level, I kind of look at things as systems. And I've heard a lot today that kind of falls under like herd mentality. And so there's a lot of kind of where we're at with the evolution of the human brain generally is that it's pretty instinctive still. It's still pretty prehistoric, a lot of really lizard brain kind of domination. So it's like, a human left to their own devices without things like this EmpowerHour, without these kinds of discussions, it's kind of going to fall to herd mentality as a lowest common denominator. So I've just come to accept that. Like a lot of you, I've had different kinds of experiences of, like when I was a kid, and I guess Mark had this too, like they'd say, "Hey, Chinese." And I kind of felt it didn't even faze me. Like because I'd seen it before. I'd seen other kids. There were a few other Asian kids I knew, and they had gotten called that. But the funny thing is even as young as I was, I felt sorry for the kid that said, "Hey, Chinese" to me, because I was like, God, he doesn't know anything else. His experience is limited. Whereas I feel comfortable with all races. We were brought up very liberally, but yeah. So since the brain's it's kind of lizard brain dominant still. I mean, it's unfortunate, but I feel like the universe has kind of left our brain hardwired at the kind of more prehistoric level. A lot of academia thinks that since our hardwiring is not going to really change anytime too soon, it's put upon us to take sociological action, to have these discussions, to open things up, because even though our brain's still hardwired very prehistorically, discussions and thinking in these ways that we're doing today can create new neurons in individuals' brains and kind of try to combat this lizard brain that we're working with right now. So kind of an Asian systems look at the thing. So that's all I got.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, the Steve Bros. And like, it makes me think of neuroplasticity that's being discussed now, right? More of that understanding, like, oh yeah, we can evolve. We can create new pathways. And thank goodness that it's finally recognized that there are practices that are useful. And actually they happen to be indigenous practices that have taught us some of these things for many years that can help us refine our being. So yeah, amen to that. Thanks to Steve Bros. So you've also been a part of every EmpowerHour, so I wanted to give you that whoop whoop. Thanks for being a part of these.
And I got to put in a plug for yoga real quick, with helping to change and helping to evolve our brains to succeed in this that we're talking about. So I felt that definitely.
Yeah, thank you. He was not paid to say that. All right. All right, good. So we do still have about 5 minutes that I want to share with some discussion time before we kind of do a little bit of a wrapping up in our last 5 minutes. And I was hoping, I know Jesse had to leave, he was at work, so sadly he had to part, but I did sort of want to touch on what I guess I kind of already did, just about that otherness that happens. And I think that many of us can relate to that on many different levels, whether it was within our own ethnic, our own culture that othered us. Like I know from talking to Eliza, like, you've mentioned about being more American than your parents, who were holding you to, wanting you to identify solely as being Chinese, right? Or if it's within our feeling inside of us where there is that otherness, you know, trying to identify. So maybe that can be a little bit of a topic we dive into a little bit about the otherness, which ties in a little bit with also first generation, second generation, if I could. And I definitely, if anyone hasn't spoken, please speak up, but I see Eliza, go for it.
Oh yeah, I wanted to make a comment. I was telling Mark this when I was younger. I don't even know how the conversation came up, but I was telling my dad I'm Chinese American. He's like, no, you're Chinese. You're not Chinese American. I'm like, what? Like he like really didn't want, he really wanted me to be, you know, to remember that Chinese part of me. And so I had to grow up with that a little bit, which was kind of interesting. Because I do want to keep that, the culture and tradition, and the Chinese culture is superstitious, very superstitious. And like Kenjo, I would still practice all that superstition, even when I'm married to a non-Chinese, and he is so patient, and he'll be like, okay, this doesn't make sense, but I'll go along with it, right? And so I feel a lot of that pull sometimes. Part of me understand like, okay, this is superstitious, but part of me is like, but I grew up with this. I enjoy it, you know, it's you know, it's a part of me, you know. And if we ever have kids, I'll most likely will teach them something very similar. Not sure it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's part of the Chinese culture. They're very superstition, right? Like my Chinese name was picked by my birthday from a fortune teller. Like they would literally look at your time of birth and your birthday, and then they're like, okay, she should have this name. And it's like, for example, my name, my Chinese name is meant as the elegance of a phoenix, because I think they knew that I was going to be super tomboyish. So they wanted to like balance that or something. And that is something very superstitious, but something I like appreciate. I don't know why, but I appreciate like from the Chinese culture. And I know my dad appreciates it. So I want to bring that in. And so there's a lot of overstepping for me. And I feel like I'm like, there's a line and I have a leg on both sides. Part of me want to make my parents happy and to keep up with that tradition. And a part of me understand like, well, some of it is kind of dated and I shouldn't be doing that. And so it's just one of those things where I don't want to lose that, but at the same time, maybe create something of my own, since, you know, Asian American is very much something too. So just a thought. But yeah, maybe carry on all the good and leave the bad or something. I don't know.
Thank you, Eliza. Yeah, I'm gonna comment on that as we close. A couple of things about that. Very timely to sort of think about that idea of what do we carry forward, and what is it simply there that remains as something to honor and respect. Was there anybody that had anything else they wanted to share? As I'm always sad as we get to this point, we're getting ready to close, but I wanted to make sure we know that this is a conversation to continue in some form or another within your communities. But if anybody wanted to bring something forward or some topic, please do.
You don't want to open another can of worms, do you, Mukunda?
I know. I just thought of that. I was like, oh, Mia, she's probably got something. But well, I do want to, but for time's sake, I will have to start to reel us in a little bit. But that just goes to show, I think this is such a powerful thing, to be able to create conversation in community, to be able to, I saw some of the chats going on the side there, and I really appreciate those comments, that it's by having us tell our stories and to be able to speak out loud, and to not just feel like these are things that we have to hold within ourselves, not just in the space of the intellect, but even in our hearts and in our emotional body, that this can typically create some kind of sideways response if we haven't figured out how to do the healing work or to resolve whatever it is within us that feels needs attention. Somehow it's even oftentimes, I guess, not as conscious as we might realize, that some of these behaviors have created our outlook on life. Some of the things that we do, we want to honor our culture for sure. We want to respect what's been handed down and handed, even I say up, from the generations that rise us up, that give us the support. But we also need to reflect and decide, does this still create a positive world? Is this something that still makes sense within the context of the world that I'm living and growing into? We have the idea, for example, of arranged marriages of India that I've always been conscious of. There's also, without it being as literal, just organized ways of trying to train our children to behave, to act, that you should be this, you should not be this. Even for me growing up, it was assumed that I was straight. So you try to gear a child with all the things that you're like, to the straight child. And you're like, why is this world doing this? I've become more conscious of a lot of my trans brothers and sisters, a very similar thing. Why is this world trying to form something around me that they think is their version of right, when what needs to happen is the individual is awakening to their own consciousness. So if we can appreciate and always respect what has happened and never say that's wrong. To me, what I like to say is that makes sense. That made sense then. Apparently there was some logic, and that's awesome because it helped us get here. And maybe some of it I'm going to also bring with me because it resonates still for whatever reason, and that's awesome. But what stops me feeling whole? What are those things that I feel that I'm obligated to bring forward that doesn't fully make sense? And my understanding is the only way to break that is through some kind of self-inquiry and contemplative practice, some form of quiet that gives us a clearing where we can say, who am I? I am the accumulation of all of this amazing things before me. But am I only that? Or am I some other deeper essence that we're all trying to open up to? And that, to me, is the gift of what these indigenous practices can give us. So if we can, I'd actually like to take a minute and have meditative silence, and just to let us all come to a place where we can be comfortable, where you can find your place on your chair, or if you're sitting on the ground, adjust here and there so you feel that connection to the earth, our primal source of our sense of physical being, connection to the ground, to this gentle pull of gravity. And let the eyes also close. Relax the muscles in the face as though you're letting go of all expression. Begin to notice the flow of breath moving in and out through the nose. This life force energy that flows all around us, even through our body, through our cells where there is space. We connect with that somethingness and that nothingness. Imagine you can locate your center, wherever that feels to be for you, whether that's in the center of the head, the heart center, the solar plexus, some other area. Imagine that location. And as you breathe, feel the pulse of that center of you. And allow it to send the messages through the body, not through language, through words, but through vibration and sense of wholeness. Let's take another few moments here and breathe with that center of you. Om. Take a deep inhale through the nose. Exhale through the mouth. And when you're ready, gently start to look low as you open the eyes. You can bring your eyes back up to the center. All right, thank you all so much for making time to be here today and being a part of this 5th Empower Hour. Think about how this can be something that you do take action around. What does that mean for you in your words, in your physical action? And stay connected. So thank you so much. Any thoughts that come up, please send them in, connect with us again. And there'll be another discussion next month, which will be on the recognizing LGBTQ month. And Jesse will be back for that as well. And maybe some of you would like to join. So thank you all.
Thank you, Mark.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for sharing all what we could do to empower each other.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
See you next month.
Thanks everyone for joining on IG Live. Good to have you all. And we'll see you again real soon. Thanks, Mia. I'll read. I haven't had a chance to read yet.
That's okay. No, that's fine. Might change the title. If you have any suggestions, let me know.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Very good.
All right. Have a good day.
Good stuff.
Bye.
All right. Bye.